Good morning, people.
Like we're about ready, huh, Russ?
Yeah, I think so. We're a little low on census, but I think we better go ahead and get started anyway. Welcome all. Let's see. Try to make even greater use of chat than usual because this is our last group time together, and we want to be sure that you get a chance to ask all of your questions and comments. So here's the plan for today. We are going to briefly go over your comments and then a couple key points that Ross and I have about wrapping up about strong grant proposals. Then we want to spend at least 15 minutes on the culmination. This whole class comes together next week here about how this mock review process will go. And we hope this will be a good experience and a chance for you to kind of look behind the curtain and experience being on a review panel. So in addition to being the recipient, you can see how that goes, but clarify any questions. And then as much time as we have left, here's the things that Ross and I had, and I'll return to this, but you might want to just think about if there are any of these in particular that you might want to prioritize or any other ones. And Jordan just posted a few minutes ago these slides. And there'll be there's a lot of other resources that I will point out for the mock review process that are posted also. But if you want to look at these slides to refer to them, they're available now. Ross, anything else you want to add at this point, just in terms of the overview for today?
No.
Okay.
Oh, no, Russ, nothing else other than if when we get to the later things, if there's something you've missed, we'll do our best to try, but I think we can also do some of that in chat. So there's a lot to cover today, and this is our last time when we're all together, as Russ said.
Yep. Okay, doke. Let's fasten your seatbelt and let's go for it. So here's the thing I extracted. And by the way, I want to thank all of you for the good job you do in chat. Ross and I do read those every week. I don't know, occasionally we make a comment or two, not every week, certainly not every one, but if you want to reflect on any of those, but thank you for doing that. From our perspective, that enriches the class a lot. It lets us know kind of what you want to do things here. So let's just dive in here, and I may well have missed things or misinterpreted. So bring those up if I did. But here's the key things I extracted. As I said, are there a lot of directions that you saw to NIH or for NIH reviewers? And the question was, are there specific instructions for DNI reviewers? As I said here, the short answer is no, but there's always exceptions. The most important exception is if it is a specific RFA that has, I should just put specific RFA here, with a dedicated study section just for that announcement, then there will be instructions, but generally not. In fact, there's a long backstory here. And for example, the SIHH, which is the DNI one, reviews a lot of different grants, not just one to what we've posted a couple times there. The main one, what is called the parent grant, the PAR for that. They review a lot. But in general, my answer, and Ross, you may want to correct or qualify this or whatever, there aren't specific ones, despite the fact that like the PAR does call out kind of specific issues there. Want to add to or clarify that, Ross?
Nothing much other than if you look at, so if you're submitting an implementation science grant, you know, it likely would go to this study section, but it could go to a different one, and you can also just see the backgrounds of people. So in a way, that specific DNI training expertise is embodied in the makeup of each study section. And of course, the main one is this one, but some like HIV tends to do their own thing a little bit more. And I know in past times, they didn't even like things going to the SIHH. They have different deadlines. So it's sort of everyone's a little different, but Russ, I agree with the way you summarized it.
I'll just say one thing without going down a rabbit hole. They're throwing out things that maybe is helpful to know. We've been focusing a lot on your program officer. And those, he or she is your ally there that you'll work with and communicate. But when your grant goes in, it goes to the scientific review office, which NIH makes a big deal. I think in generally, it's for good reason, but it gets carried away about this ironclad thing between review, and your program officer has to really stay away from that and not get involved in that to, quote, remove any appearance of bias or anything. So that person handles it until the review is done. Then it goes back, and then your program officer gets it then. But usually this Office of Scientific Review is so concerned about not biasing anything anyway that I'll just tell you one quick 2-sentence story. When I was at NIH, the thing that probably pissed me off more than anything else is that PAR that you see. It's been revised. We revised it, again, collaboratively across the NIH institutes. We wanted to orient the reviewers, the study section, because this was the main one, to that. And they refused to let us do that and talk about what we were looking for, the review and the D&I criteria. We took it all the way to the very top officer. He said, absolutely not. And the reason why is, in their perception, if we talked with them about this announcement that we wanted to move the field forward, that was going to potentially bias some proposals that came in that weren't in response to that particular PAR. So there are some good reasons for that, but it's also very frustrating, I think. Having said that, part of the reason that we tried to provide both the self-reflection exercise for us, the whole article and others, and we'll talk about that, is these are, I think, good bets about what D&I reviewers are going to look at. But there is no formal, at least to my knowledge, I've never seen general NIH guidance. So sorry to go on and have a little PTSD, but that's a little bit of the backstory. The third reviewer problem that there have been several things, including some YouTubes about this. You might Google in your spare time if you want, but it's a fact of our life. And we'll talk about that when we get to review more. And it is unfortunate, but it's true that often a third reviewer can kill a proposal, particularly depending on the dynamics of the study section. And we'll talk about those a little later. And that's one of the reasons we wanted you to be on there. But I guess my only thought about the third reviewer problem there is just really this notion, try to anticipate all the different perspectives that are gonna come up there. And it does help, I think, to review the list of what are they called? Standard reviewers or permanent study section members, meaning they're there for 3 years. But there's no guarantee. There's always guest reviewers there too. But part of that isn't helpful, but all I can say is that's, thick skin and resilience. And sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. Ross, do you want to add anything to that?
Only one part, I think. So the third reviewer, so what happens is there's sort of a piling on effect in the study section. It's often the person who talks first, if they're eloquent and convincing. Some people can sell you anything. And so the third reviewer, if the first person who talks really loves your proposal and the other two people were lukewarm, they can actually help you. And so while we always think of it as sort of the negative, there are some times where someone can swing it the other way, even if they're only one of three. Now, I would say more often it goes the other direction, but it's so, it's the sociology of a group. People follow along. If someone speaks first, oh yes, my esteemed colleague, Dr. Glasgow, I agree with everything he said. And it's just sort of how the groups work. And all you can do, and we'll talk a little bit about revising, is be really systematic when you get that back, because sometimes when a third reviewer gave you a not great score, there are still fixable things in there. So that's all I'll add. Yeah.
There's a couple other dynamics issues there that do go on at a study section that may or may not happen. We'll talk about those as well. But any questions? I don't see anything in chat yet. Any other things people want to elaborate on, or is there part of that question I didn't get? No.
Yes, this is just a simple one, but like, what amount of time generally are given to study sections, and is there anything more, common?
Yes, in general, again, it does vary a lot, but pretty much what we're going to do is fairly standard. Ross has chaired more of these than I can, but usually we say around 12 minutes, I think, don't we, Ross? And so everybody has to be prepared. And generally, both the scientific review officer will do a good job, and a chair will really keep things moving along too. What you want to avoid, but unfortunately does happen, is often, particularly if it'll somewhat controversial proposal, is that will take more time. And then again, it's another frustrating thing, is you can end up spending like maybe up to a half hour on some of the early proposals, but then you go through, I don't know, like 30. So then you get to the end of the day and people have to get to the airport. So you end up getting like 7 minutes on the last ones. You probably don't want to know that, but that's kind of what my experience, what happens. Ross, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, it's usually a 12 to 15 minute window. That was Marie, right, Marie? Yeah. The way that the order goes, usually the very best average scores go first, the worst scores go last. It's almost opposite of how it really should be if you think about it, but they're trying to give benefit to those that scored well, because you don't want to be that last one before people are all heading out of town. You want to be in that first half or so if you can. And they do divide up in sections. So if you're doing R01s, you'll do those separately from the small grants, separately from the career grants. So that way people are thinking about the mechanism of the RFA or what they're applying to. But
yeah, the other strategy, for better or for worse, that's used, because they do get so many, and it is hard to get reviewers these days, is the triage effect. Whereas I think you've all probably either seen or heard of, where, often like half of the grants don't get discussed at all, to try and do that, the lower half. And they look at the reviews that come in ahead of time. And if there's consistency about things being poorly rated across reviewers, then those aren't discussed. Usually the first thing that'll happen is it'll say, here's the grants you can see that are not up for discussion to be triaged. Does anybody want to, quote, I don't think use the phrase, rescue it or request that those come off for discussion? So you get that, but that saves a lot of time. Otherwise, you'd have like 5 minutes for a proposal to do that. But then, as Ross says, then it does usually begin with the top scores to go on down. So, okay. As I saw it, you had comments. Some people seem to really like the whole article and find it helpful. Others, I think, I'll paraphrase, found it a little sophomorific, or it talked about some of the issues, but really didn't go into depths and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to mention there are a few other things. Ross and I haven't talked, but I'd be interested in what he uses. But I think I would say it's really good practice to use some type of external checklist or list of key factors to kind of bounce your own, do a crosswalk, bounce your own proposals against. I have to say myself, I use the one that we've called self-reflection that's in there. That's pretty self-centered, because we developed that ourselves based on Ross, and Ross helped us with Ross and Enola did to use that. But the whole article you can use. There's, I think, in the optional readings, I don't know if any of you have, Ross or Jordan might notice, there's another one that does talk about key characteristics. I actually like to use the STARry criteria that I think most of you have seen probably in another class, that technically are developed for publications, but I find them almost equally useful for proposals. So I will usually bounce mine up against both our own kind of internal thing that we adapted from Ross and used to be interactive, but isn't anymore. And then the STARry criteria. But Ross, I don't know, do you have any tips, or what do you usually do?
I think any of those is fine. Some of it depends on how much time you leave yourself at the end. So you have to leave enough time. I think like Starry and some of these more comprehensive lists are great. If you have to go to the shorter version, then you might have to go to the top 10 list or something. But I think doing something, and actually what I usually do, I have someone who's even not on the grant read it. Like I usually get our center manager. She's written and worked on a lot of grants, and asked someone with fresh eyes, as well as someone on the team, including the PI, to go through the list, because often someone with a fresh set of eyes sees something missing that some of us who deep, up to our necks in it are missing. So that's another thing to do, as long as you leave yourself enough time.
Yeah. Just a slight riff or maybe a paraphrase of what Ross just said. What I will do sometimes with my mentees, or recommend with our checklist there, and you could use it with anyone, is particularly if you're like in a case situation or something, have your mentor go through and do the checklist. You do it yourself and then talk about that together. That can be a useful discussion there. But this thing that Ross mentioned as an external reviewer is really critical. And what a lot of places will do, I have to say, we usually, I guess being cheap or not a lot of resources, will save it for a really big grant or something like a program project, but we will actually pay an external reviewer, a really experienced person that's been there, to go and do a thorough review for us. Now, again, as Ross said, obviously you can only do that if you're well ahead of time, so you have a chance to reflect their comments. But often I felt that's been money well spent if you can get there early enough to have an external reviewer really go and give you a fine-tooth review. So, anything in particular about the whole article that you all would like to talk about? Okay, let's keep moving along here very quickly so we can get to the other issues. And I know you have other ones. Just a comment here that some of you had. More and more often, we are seeing cost or some type of economic issues almost being required, or technically it's not required or mandated, but I'd say almost expected in the D&I grants. But in usual, you're not looking for this to be like a full-blown economic analysis where you do a projection of total societal benefit and cost benefit over time, but looking at what is it take, particularly what is the time and the cost to deliver and implement the intervention or the program. That is becoming more and more almost expected. And then the last one, I'll just say another one of those factors of life, and probably more than anything else, this is something to do with Congress and politics than anything else. But it is true historically and still today, NCI has more money than anybody else. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it has to do with lobbying. A lot of it does have to do with people in Congress and that are how powerful they are and their constituents there. You probably have seen, though, again, going back, HIV, that effect there was dramatically increased and still has, if you will, proportionate to disease risk, I think more recently, here in the last few years, there's been a huge increase in funding for Alzheimer's disease, and National Institute of Aging has gotten more. There also is starting to come out now, you might have seen just in the last year, and I'm confident that there's going to be more specific equity-focused things. But that kind of is what it is. That said, NCI's pay line is not necessarily better than others because they do get more applications than anybody else too. Anybody want to elaborate, or Ross, and then we'll move on.
The one thing I would say about the NCI thing is they've also got 72 cancer centers around the country who are very powerful. And
Yeah.
so if you think of that, and I just looked it up, they're in 36 states in the District of Columbia. That's more than half the senators. And so that is no other set of centers has anywhere near that number of sort of centers out there like this, and the power and the clout behind them. And that's not a small thing.
It is. One last story as we switch there, but fortunately or unfortunately, I guess I shouldn't say, because I'm beneficiary of a lot of the cancer funding, as is Ross. But just one example, diabetes, I guess, well, it's a long time ago. I forget now, really dating myself, maybe 25 years ago. diabetes didn't receive much funding at all, but they had a huge increase or bolus. And the driving force behind that was, some of you might be old enough to remember Newt Gingrich, powerful congressperson. He had a relative that developed diabetes and some of these things. And so then they pushed things through. And like right now, that's part of the reason NCI has so much is, as you probably have heard, Biden has been responsible, both when he was vice president and now coming back again, this moonshot initiative, which is additional specific money to do something there. So you probably didn't want to hear that. Let's talk about summarizing this and then talk about what we can control. So going back to where we started, and this is in year 10 too, this classic 10 ingredients proposal by Nola Proctor, colleagues, Ross is probably on that too, I forget here, I think is really a really helpful rule of thumb to think about what those issues are. And then I guess my other keyword here would be integration. Okay, across the aims page, we've talked about this, especially for your theory or model, across the measures, across the analysis, that sort of thing. So being consistent, this notion of just communicating and realizing, you know, as you'll see when you're reviewers, how overwhelming it can be. And Ross always likes to say you're flying on the airplane to do this, and at the end of the day, reviewing them. If you have something that is so dense, it looks like microfiche and you can't make your way through, it's just gonna kind of set you wrong, as opposed to a proposal that has some white space, that's nicely organized, that has clear tables that summarize things there. Quick question for you all. I appreciate a number of you looked at the examples of the grants there. Anything stand out to you all, or either that you thought looked particularly good about the successful ones, or other questions you had about the example grants?
I think one of the things that stood out to me is what you just said, just the clarity, like the organization. They're very clear subheadings, very clear figures, very clear tables. So I could imagine as a reviewer, that's really easy to look at and is going to make you happier, which means you may score better because you're happy.
Absolutely. It also can really help to clarify things, because for me, one of the most frustrating things as an applicant is when reviewers just misread something, or they get it wrong, or they say they never addressed this, and you did. But, you know, there's nothing you can do about that. All you can do, and I think that's another place where you can be sure that you really clarify and put there in a nice figure or table, exactly, particularly any key issues. So.
Yeah, I think in Josh, what you're saying, that there is a correlation between someone reading something, even if it's a great idea, great methods, great team, if it's not written well, if it's not organizing well, people will equate sloppy writing with sloppy research. And if you get down that road, then you're not going to score well. So there is really something to organizing and writing it well, and making just little things, even grammatical errors, and just making sure it's a good, easy read is pretty important when people are getting, you might get 8 to 10 of these to review at a study section. So there's a lot of work that goes into them. So the better and easier it is to read, the better. Monica with something in there.
Okay, yeah. Describing this reached the next question too, about what do you think is the most successful? Yeah, I do think that's true. And particularly, I think I'll just say two things about that: the background of the existing one, and showing, I think Enola talks about it in the group as the gap, so what are you contributing? This study, it's not yet just another study, of X, but what are you contributing there, the background that you've done. Certainly, the more preliminary work you have, the better. But it varies. That's often one of the criteria that people decide whether to go for a full R01 or a smaller grant, is how much preliminary evidence that you do have. Yeah, I think there were some good examples. I agree with that. Somewhere else, I think one of you might have asked in reflections, to me, a part that I will look for anyway, I don't know, this is instructions anyway, is not just the preliminary work that the PI has done, and maybe even other people, but if you have done anything as a team. I think often that can help convince reviewers that you can really do this. If you've published before together, you've had a team that works, that's an added bonus. Again, not a requirement, but I think it's an added bonus that increases the probability that you can be successful. So.
And I think that's especially really important on center grants and larger scale multi-site grants where there's going to be complexities in running and managing. So I think that's a good point. I agree.
Okay, so I'm going to switch now. Please put in chat if there are other key issues, and then I am going to come back about 5 slides from now for other things. We'll have potpourri. We're not going to get to everything, but I do feel it's important to take at least 10 minutes here. These slides are posted. There are documents for each of the things we're going to talk about posted in Canvas now. And then Jordan is going to send you a package that I'll talk about in a minute Friday morning. And that's one of the reasons why we're being so hardcore about needing your proposal wherever you are by no later than 5 tonight, so we can get these to you tomorrow to do your job as a reviewer. The way the review works, and again, this is on a document, I think it's called cheat sheet or chair cheat sheet for reviewer, is we'll first go through, we have 3 reviewers for each of these, and we tried to make this as close as we can to the real thing that you'll see, at least in an NIH review. You quickly go through, no discussion, only a number in order, reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3. What is your initial score on the grant? You just say them, that kind of provides the context. Then the primary reviewer is the only one that does anything about summarizing the project. You hope that people have looked somewhat, but often they don't, particularly if there are like 30 grants being reviewed. Most people probably aren't going to do any more than look at the, the abstract or the aims, if that, but to highlight the key points there, and then to emphasize, so kind of let the other people in the study section know what the issues are, what's the key scientific issues and the impact ones with the design, the outcomes, and then they emphasize what they see as major strengths and weaknesses. And again, I should have emphasized here, major. You don't have time, nor should you distract with going down a rabbit hole, but the major strengths or weaknesses. We'd really like you to also have the other grants. I hope you've read all the other grants because you won't have that many. You're going to be in a group with either 2 or 3 others. So we are going to ask you to read and know a pretty good job the other proposals. That's a little different than a study section. So first reviewer gets the most time. Second reviewer is to add only new points, not to waste the time, as Ross said, although people still do say, well, I agree with my colleague, Dr. Brownson, that's fine. What we really want to hear is anything that's different that they want to add to that. Or I would say if they really want to underscore something, if there was a really decisive comment made, positive or negative, but you don't need to just go down all the points and say, I agree, I agree, I agree. Then the third reviewer, again, is even more brief as you go there. Then we open it up, and from my perspective, this is often where the magic happens and where the chair can make a huge difference, and the chemistry or the sociology interaction among the chairs makes a difference. I think a good chair, if you have a discrepancy, okay, will pull out and expand on that, making sure we hear from everybody, and then you open this up to the entire panel for people to have discussion. So this is an open discussion period. Usually this goes more where there are big discrepancies, I think there. And the notion is, again, not to seek consensus here, but just to make sure that the issues have been clearly delineated, especially because everybody on the study section votes. The 3 reviewers essentially dominate everything and set the stage, but every single member of the proposal votes on every proposal. So this is kind of where you kind of fill in the gaps and that sort of thing.
Russ, one thing, could I add one thing on that discussion? The one thing on that discussion, people sometimes think that discussion is everyone has to reach consensus, and that really isn't necessary. Yeah. There was a grant I remember, a small grant, and the reviewers got in an argument about the right study design. Well, there actually were 2 correct studies. There wasn't just a single answer. So, sometimes there's multiple answers to something, and sometimes then the chair has to kind of shut down that academic debate and move on to things that really are, maybe really strong or really weak. So that was just something I want to say.
Thanks. Good,
Yeah.
good point. Again, we'll come back to, are some nuances. We won't get everything. Please put them in there. Thanks, Jordan, for putting this in there. The final score, then we will come back, Josh, to answer your question. The chair, which will be Ross or myself, will summarize then the main cohorts very briefly. Then you go back at that time and you start in order to say your final scores. Your review sheet, Jordan will be able to point this out to you where it is. And again, you'll get it as a packet, but it's posted now. Your review sheet put on there. We'll go back and revisit after this discussion, the final scores. And again, you'll go those in order. So after all this discussion, reviewer 1, what's your final score? Reviewer 2, reviewer 3, then you will ask, say, is there anybody on the study section that is going to vote outside this range? So like if the final scores were 3 to 4, let's say they were close, you ask, and then you are required, supposed to, if you're gonna like give it a 1 or a 7, then you do need, again, it's not a lot of discussion, but just to indicate that. But general, there's a lot of pressure then to vote within that range of what the reviewers have. Okay, and so we will be using this process as, here's what I've been saying, but to be explicit about it, okay, you'll either have 2 or 3 other proposals to be in the group. You will have this review form there. It's really, really important. And this goes for real world study section as well as this, to note right at the top. This is why we've asked you each time to indicate what type of proposal. Is it an R01? Is it a K award? Is it a foundation grant? And that is one of the first things you fill in to keep that on top of your mind. You should complete your initial scores and your comments. We'll talk a little bit more about what you put in there. And then after the review, not before, but shortly after the review and the discussion, you enter your final scores there that you had. And then if you want to change any comments based on the reviews, please do that, because we will give these to your colleagues, to your peers here too. So after you hear the discussion, you should have everything filled out with your final scores and your point before your review. But then afterwards, please make any additions that you want. You will also get a order of review or review matrix there, so we won't waste time. So you'll know coming in, okay, whose grant's being reviewed first, which one are you first reviewer on, which one are you. What we're doing is, it said third, because we're going to give each of you a chance to be the primary reviewer, to succinctly summarize that, to lead, and then also to be your chance to be the infamous third reviewer. But the external person that we have that's the experienced reviewer is going to be the second reviewer always, to kind of provide some standardization. You will, there is also going to be in the packet, Jordan will send you, all these things, is the tip sheet that's real similar to what I talked about before. Let me just finish going through this and we'll see if you have any questions. Well, let me pause there and see if there are questions about what you're going to receive. And then we'll just talk about some of these we've talked about, but some nuances and things in being in the study section. Okay. Yeah, thanks for handling that, Josh. Yeah, that final score, and that is just a numeric average that you get. We can come back to that too. Okay. In scoring, and every study section will do this, but people don't do it enough. It's important that you use this full range. It does show you in there on each of your scoring sheets, it shows the NIH range of scores there. They do range from 1 to 9, like 1 is a perfect score. It should start at a 5 there and go from there. Often in my experience and reality, things usually often range between somewhat like a 2 and a 6. But if people really don't like something, it'll get a 7 or even a 9. this is one thing I think Ross and I like, having been around there, to see, is to try and, I mean, the job of reviewer is to identify and get the best science forward. It's not to nitpick everything, but sometimes there's this tendency to really like see who can find the most little glitch in there. Then, you know, and it's impossible in 12 pages to do it, but sometimes it kind of gets off to show, well, let's see how smart I am because I can find this little glitch that somebody did there. But there, I do like to say, think about how you'd like to be treated here and kind of use the golden rule in your things, being, you know, tough, critical, but constructive in your reviews. Talked about this one. Talked about this one. So anything else first, Ross, you want to add, or any questions anybody have on this page?
No, not so much for this page, but while I'm thinking of it, if you can join just a couple minutes early on these sections, it would be really helpful because we really do need to get started on time because we've got a tight window, especially when we're doing 4. That means we need to make sure we get that 15 minutes for each one, because if we lose 4 or 5 minutes on the front end, everybody's going to get shortchanged. So that was just one thing to really try to join like a couple minutes before the hour if you can. It would really help.
Yeah. And I believe, Jordan, let me double check. There is a specific, because we're going to have 2 study sections running next week at the same time, parallel, that you use. You will have a different, I think, different Zoom link than this one. You don't use the standard class link. Is that right, Jordan? Each person will know which one to place them automatically in the right room, correct?
Yes, they are 2 different Zoom links. Also, since I can't be there, I'll still be recording them, and I can't be in 2 rooms. So they're set up to automatically record. Calendar invites have been updated. If you don't see it, it's also on the matrix sheet at the bottom.
Good. And that's this review matrix that he talks about, which actually is a matrix that says, so yeah, not only be there early, but be ready to go, particularly if you're a first reviewer, be ready to go with your review out of the gate. Okay. So this notion of consistency is important. And I have to say, from my perspective, is one of the most frustrating things. Like if you get it and somebody gives you a 7 and then on a score, but there's hardly any weaknesses, you say, well, WTF, what's up with that? You know, so there should be some consistency between a really high score should have a preponderance of strengths there, and then lower scores should have a preponderance of weaknesses to do this. Be as specific as you can. And again, don't get down in the trivia. Okay, what are the key score driving factors? What are the major things? In general, you want an overall paragraph. Again, you've seen examples there. I think there's an example in the even the handout we're going to give you, but you have a summary, like a 1-paragraph summary, text one. And then after that, for all of these, you use bullet points. You've seen some example reviews. You don't have to write this out. In fact, you shouldn't. Just give bullet points, you know, after the overall summary for all of these points. And again, there are critiques that are posted for you. I always like to say on the review process here, you will see all the flaws. We've talked about them. We've talked about all the politics, all the constraints and things like that. I do think, from having seen a number of things in other countries, in other types of non-NIH things, that there's a lot to be said for peer review. They've done it that matches what's at least attributed to Churchill's quote about democracy. That is, it's a horrible system. It's biased. It's fraught with all sorts of things. It's just better than the alternatives. And again, what I mean by that is at least they do try to go out of their way to make sure that it's fair, that people get an equal hearing, that it isn't just a good old boy system and that sort of thing, with all of its flaws there. We really do recommend, if you have a chance, to participate in a study section. I think you'll learn a lot from being in there if you can too. You can either nominate yourself or have a mentor do this. In answer to one of your questions, you cannot sit in an NIH one, though. They just don't allow that, to see how that goes. There are some things on YouTube which have like shown simulated review study sections if you'd like to see that. But this is our attempt next week to get you to do that. And Ross and I are going to try to orchestrate things we have to make it as close to an actual NIH review section as we can there. This is a debate there, and it's just how much, and different mentors will tell you different things about, is it a good or bad thing for you to be on, do reviews? How many? I think almost everybody would say it's really informative and useful for you to do at least a couple reviews early in your career, and maybe on different study sections. Opinions differ beyond that. So any other, I think we might be done. Yeah, this is done discussing next week. So I'll pause and let me start with Jordan here first. See if there's anything I've missed, Jordan, or that they need to know. And then I'll see if Ross wants to add, and then any last questions from you all.
The only thing I was going to say is if you email me, please include Russ and Ross on there also, just so that the three of us can get you the appropriate answer.
Yeah. Okay. Please do start on your reviews ahead. You don't have to turn in your reviews until afterwards, but if you're going to have questions, it'd be much better about the review if we could get those, at least a couple days ahead to help inform rather than the night, the night before. So.
Yeah. And there's going to be a natural tendency here. You're reviewing your colleagues and friends. So, you want to be kind and thoughtful in your comments, but also look for the score driving strengths and weaknesses, because that's what makes it improve. And we all have to keep a thick skin when it gets to, it's always hard to be reviewed. You would normally be in that study section when you're getting reviewed. And so that's also a different part of it. But make use of that time when you can hear this and be able to ask questions.
Yeah. So again, I think be critical but constructive, I think, is what you want to do. Again, it will help your colleagues the most if you are, quote, tough, or rigid, but constructive there is what's going to be the most helpful. Another thing we didn't point here, you are not, as a reviewer, it is not your job, and at NIH anyway, it's not appropriate for you to redesign the study. You comment on the strengths or weaknesses, but it's not up to you to say, oh, well, they should have used a smart design like I did in 1923, and to do it this way. It would have been much better if they'd used my measure to look at this. So, but you comment on the strengths and the limitations of what they have proposed. Okay, well, let's see what we have time for here, and we have 15 minutes left today, and sorry to take so long, but we thought that was important. So we can't get through all of these. I think, and Ross and my going back and forth, we thought maybe the notion of talking about a revision that might be important. But let's just look at this and either fire into chat or just jump out if there are other ones. Let's take this one for sure, and then maybe as far as we can get with the other ones. Otherwise, we are in danger of having to default. And once Ross gets into baseball here, it's it's downhill from there. So anything besides the one we want to be sure and cover, besides the grant revision?
See the one from Josh.
Got it. Got it.
HRQ.
Yep,
we can do that.
Yep. I got it. Maybe we'll add some of these others in there too, if we can.
Yeah.
How about if we do this first, put in any others? I think, because I believe that's my next order of slide actually is why
and Russ, we did cover some of the second and third bullet last week, so we might be able to skip around a little bit on the
yeah, that's good. Maybe we'll start with this unless we hear other things and then go to these two down here.
Yeah,
maybe we'll do ARC first since we've particular request, and then dissemination plan. That might be what we'll get to.
Great.
So revise and resubmit. Here's a frustrating thing is you get your score relatively early. And that, in my experience, NIH varies, you have to check on, go into ERA anywhere from like a few days to like a month. You'll get your score. but nobody will talk with you at all. Program officer can't, because they don't have anything before you do until you get the actual reviews. So it's a waste of time. Don't ask when you get your review and you get a score of 22. It's just going to waste the program officer's time if you call in and say, well, tell me about it in the review and what's going to happen. Okay, they have to wait. You have to wait until your actual reviews are posted. Okay. Often things are, it's called triaged or not discussed. It's there. And just says here, we've all had this happen. I had one happen a few months ago. No matter how long you go, it'll happen. It's not discussed. That's not the end of the world. These days, you have in general one opportunity to resubmit. This is for a standard R01. Sometimes you go in for a specific RFA and it's one shot only, but that is listed early on the first or second page, the due dates and how long it goes for. If it's going to be, often things go for like 3 years or something, but it will tell you. But generally you can only resubmit the same grant once. Used to be you could do it twice, but then you have to change it and be a new one. Often it's a big question about and this is something to talk through with your program officer. They're not going to be able to totally answer it. Usually, if you're pretty close to scoring, you'll want to go back in and you'll just want to be sure you know. If it's really a pretty poor score, you can get some help either from experienced colleagues or your program officer trying to read between the lines about that to know, like, well, does this seem remediable or not there? The other thing that is appropriate, and I always ask, is to remind the program officer before, like a week or so before your review, that you're coming up for discussion there. And could they possibly go to the review? Most of them try to be at the review, but they can't be at everyone. And that is really helpful because they've been in the room and heard the discussion, and not everything can be communicated, in writing on your summary scores there. We're going to show you the thing. You have one page to summarize your responses here. And there is an example in Canvas. I'm going to show you 1 or 2 examples here. 1-page introduction, and then usually some way you want to do throughout the text where you change, whether it's underlined or italics or something like that. So you can show the changes that you have made there. Here's one way of doing it. I use a little different one, but this is maybe the clearest way if you can. Here's the issue. And again, you need to pick out from all the reviews, what are the key issues there that are done, and then kind of what response. Oh, I think this is actually for working internally, isn't it, Ross?
Yeah, so this is something I do for every grant to look at revision. And I basically take every weakness and put them in a grid like this by section, and then do sort of a simple content analysis where you look at the categories in that middle column and kind of look for things that come up repeatedly, especially look at things like this one got good scores, the significance got 2s and 3s, and then look for what am I going to do about it? Can I just modify this? Abby was one of our team members, so I talked to her about one of these. So, kind of thinking about here's how we begin to put together a response. And then this is what gets us started toward building that 1-page response, which we will talk more about.
Thanks. I'm sorry I missed and forgot what this was at first. I think it's very helpful. I haven't seen this done in actual response page. Usually you have something, and this is one, you only have 1 page. The problem with this one, of course, is it runs together. It's a lot, it's too much, but you can see in general what you want to do, and you only have room, you only have 1 page here, is to pick out what the key issues are, summarize the concern, if you can, in 1 sentence or less, and then what your response is. Okay. I will usually try to put somewhere, oh, here it is, where you see sections there. So you point them for more detail. You say, here's kind of what we've done, and then you see these sections here. To do that, the trick is to show, from my perspective, that you're responsive and respectful, but you stand up for yourself too. You don't just roll over in everything they say that you want to do. You don't have to do everything that they say. When you get the infamous third reviewer thing, different strategies, I often like to play off, particularly if there are two strong reviews and only one. I will say, here's the issue that was brought up here, but, you know, as reviewers 1 and 2, you know, found this, not to be an issue, or however you can state that diplomatically. But I like to remind them where there is a clear outlier, about that. We tried to address this one, and it seemed to be clear to reviewers 1 and 2. But here's how we have addressed it. You do not want to get into arguing with reviewers, and usually you don't want to just call them right out and say, you totally missed it, you're absolutely wrong. But however you can do that subtly. Ross, anything else you want to add to that?
Only thing I'll do, I collected some sample one-pagers, and I'll send those to Jordan to post, because there's different versions of how to do this, and you can find if there's just a handful, like if there's 3 really important comments, you don't need to go like one by one on all these. You just group, here's comment 1, 2, 3, and here's how we did it. If there's a bunch of kind of moderate comments, then you do it more like this. And so it sort of depends a little on your style and the number of comments and how big they are when you write this one pager. But this is sort of like when we talk about how the Ames page is the most important. Now it's this page, and the Ames page is probably second in importance, because this will be the first thing people read on a revision. So it needs to be really good and really clear and nails down that you've been very responsive. When they do a revision, there'll be a section on the form that says, was the applicant responsive to review the original review? And if they think you're not responsive, you're pretty much toast.
Yep. Slight caveat, at least what I will do sometimes, the first thing that reviewers do may be that they read the summary sheet too. They also will see the reviews that you've gotten. And sometimes that is helpful and is going to be the framework that our reviewers are going to take too. To me, that's helpful to kind of see the critique, and then, as Ross said, then to see how you've responded to that. But from my perspective, the mistake people make too often is trying to address everything, including things that are trivial. So they address 20 things, but they don't have adequate time to, these were the 2 things why you didn't get funded. So I like to say, spend enough time on those. You do not have to at all address every little thing that came up there. You can certainly address those issues, including show, like with italics or underlining in the text, other changes that you made. But you do need to get across, this is your chance to, in a way, it's your rebuttal that you have there. But again, it's this balance between being assertive, clarifying. I think the general way to do it is, if somebody really screwed up as a reviewer, rather than calling them out, saying this idiot missed it or can't read, you say, we need to clarify what it was, as on page 12. We want to clarify that this is the issue. Okay, our HRQ, let's get to that. Yeah, Josh, that's right. Types of review. HRQ not only generally has less money, but often, I don't know if this is always the case, maybe some of you do, that they also have to include indirects as part of your thing, the indirect rates too. So that even means, rather than NIH, just so everybody's on the same page, you get funded for the total cost of your grant, and then your institutional overhead or your indirect is on top of that. At ARC and a number of other places, that's not the case. You have to add up all together. If you're doing primary care things, my experience is often ARC is maybe a more sympathetic place, or maybe the reviews even a little more informed about primary care issues. I think experiences I've had, ARC tends to stick a little more to, like, when they call out what their priority issues are, rather than just kind of whatever the investigator wants to come into. Josh, do you want to follow up at all about it? And then Ross might have some comments too.
No, I think that was helpful. I mean, I mean, I do mostly health systems research.
Yep.
And so how do we organize care? So obviously that fits really well into ARC's priorities.
Yep.
Which is great that I have a very clear funding agency, but it's challenging, so my mentor talked about the fact that he developed a prediction model for DVT prophylaxis need, and he couldn't get it funded anywhere until he went to ARC, but then it was like, half of what he could have gotten from NHLBI, and then the indirects were inside.
Yep.
So all of that was just very frustrating, but he got it funded, which I guess is the ultimate goal.
It
That's one
is.
thing you might, sometimes you can take a bigger grant and chop it in, so it might end up being 2 ARC submissions as opposed to 1. So, but I always go like, if you've got an agency and a PO excited about it and it's a good fit, at least that's where I would start, and then see if you can make it work financially.
Yeah, good points.
And I think we mentioned this when Robin was on with us, but talk with different program officers, particularly when you're thinking about ARC or PCORI, versus NIH. I always would talk to program officers from each place, to get their sense about, what's the fit or whatever. We didn't get to today, but in terms of the significance, I did write a comment in the in your reflections there. One way that you can enhance your significance, I think both for reviewers, but equally importantly for program, is to show how this addresses key priorities that come from either what the funding institute has said, or like a really recent authoritative, review, comprehensive review or meta-analysis or something, a conclusion this is done, or like, to me, the kind of gold standard is if you get something like the National Academy of Medicine, or what, NASM now, I guess, has come out and said a report that this is a critical need for an issue there. But I don't know, it's just another tip to try and address the significance, because that maybe more than anything else is really in the eye of the beholder. We're at that time. Grant, sorry we didn't get there. The other slides do have a few other points if you want to look at that, including budgets or bio sketches there. But it's been a delight to have all of you. Our time has gone fast here. Look forward to seeing all of you for a really focused, tight ship. We're all going to come prepared and be there a couple minutes early next week, and I hope the class will end up well. If you do have questions, email all of us. As Jordan said, just email all 3 of us, whoever can get back to you. But again, try to do this early on, not just the last day before your review. Ross, your any concluding last words?
No, I think it's been great. Thanks everyone for being a great class. It's the biggest class we've had, so we've been trying to keep up with you, and it's been really good. The projects are really interesting, and looking forward to next week. And the only other thing I will say, when you've got multiple grants to look at now, I try to sort of do one, let it sit a little while, go back to, kind of budget out your time. I realize it's a kind of a tight window coming up, but at least for me, I like to take little chunk, like 2 hours this morning I'll work on, I'll come back the next day, so that I've got a little time to think about it and come back and make sure that the strengths and weaknesses you noted are going to be the take-home ones for you. I think that's all I would add.
Okay, look
Great.
forward to getting all of these by 5 o'clock, if not before, if you haven't done it, and happy reviewing.
Yeah, thanks everyone. See you next week for some of you anyway.